Hi grades 3, today we are going to move to another math lesson. So it should be your second math lesson video. And we are still going to learn about equivalent fractions. So if you watched my first lesson, we learned what are equivalent fractions. So today we are going to learn about how to find equivalent fractions using multiplication. So here I have drawn, as we saw this in the last lesson, and even in your workbooks, if you were to move to page 94 right now, I'm looking at page 94, and you saw the similar fraction bars in your workbook. Today we are going to be working on exercise 32, and you can find that exercise in your workbooks on page 95 and 96. So that will be your work after this lesson. So as I'm teaching, you can follow along on page 72 of the textbook. So our math textbook, please follow page 72 as I am teaching this to help you understand this lesson better. Okay, so in today's lesson, we are going to find equivalent fractions using multiplication. Now, before we begin, I'm going to ask you what happens each time I divide up. So I had this first bar, I divided it into 2, then I divided it into 4, so 1, 2, 3, 4, then into eighths. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So in the last lesson, we learned what to call these. So these were halves, then quarters, then eighths. Okay? So what happens each time I divide this, or if you're using a piece of paper, to understand this, or your mom and dads are helping you with this. So if I were to divide, each time this is folded, or this strip or this bar is divided into half, and the parts are marked, so I marked my parts, okay? Each time the parts get half as large. So first I have this, now I have the same space, but I divided this space into 2. So each time the parts get half as large, and both the total number of parts and the shaded numbers of parts double. So they double up. So I have 2, then I have 4, and my shaded parts also double up. So not only do my bars double up, the parts double up, but also the shaded parts double up. So look at this. First I had 2 parts, then I shaded 1 part. So that's 2 parts. Now I have 4 parts, and instead of 1 shaded part, I have 2 shaded parts. Then when we double up 4, what do we get when we double up 4? We get 8. So 1, 2, 3, 4, I doubled it up and it became 8. So I was able to divide up this bar into eighths. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And each time now I have 4 of my shaded parts. First I have 1 shaded part, then I have 2 shaded parts. When I double up my 2, I get 4. So each time the numerator, the top, and the denominator are doubled. Okay, so watch this. I'm going to write this down. So here is if I had to write the fraction for this, I should have, what should I have? If you know it, do follow it along, or you can say it. So how many parts do I have? All together, I have 2 parts. That's my denominator. How many parts are shaded? I have only 1 shaded part. So my fraction will be 1 over 2. Now let's look at my second bar. How many parts do I have? 1, 2, 3, 4. So my denominator would be, say it if you know it, 4. How many parts are shaded? 2 parts are shaded. Then how many parts do I have in my last one? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I have all together 8 parts. So 8 will be my denominator, my bottom number, and numerator would be 1, 2, 3, 4, because 4 parts are shaded. Now, if you're having trouble remembering whether it's called a denominator or a numerator, you need to remember the word down. So D-O-W-N, down, and denominator. Okay, so denominator. Both these words, down and denominator. So remember your D, the bottom number, denominator, top number, numerator. So if you see the fractions, so each time the numerator, my top number, and the denominator are doubled. Do you see it? We can go directly. So how can we go directly from 1/2 to 4/8? How did we go from here to here? If you ask, how did Miss David, what happened? How did we go from 1 or half to 4/8? And the way we find it is, so these are, by the way, these are all equivalent fractions. Okay, I just gave you equivalent fractions. Okay, equivalent fractions are basically, as we learned in last lesson, so basically, if you need to really remember, then all you need to remember that they take up the same space. Okay, so for example, I had 1/2, I had half here, then now my numerator doubled up. Do you see? So each time we find equivalent fractions, our numerators and our denominators double up. Now we are going to find out how is that possible. So let's quickly look at, I'm going to show you. Let's quickly look at, so I have 1/2, right? My 1 looks a bit weird, but that's okay. Okay, it's 1. 1/2. Now how did if I want an equivalent fraction for 1/2, and I just said that the numbers double up when we go to our equivalent fraction, the numbers double up. What do I need to do? What's the double of 1? The double of 1 is 2. What's the double of 2? The double of 2 is 4. But let's say we didn't know this either. What I basically did was, I'm going to ask myself, what can I multiply 1 to get 2? Which times table or which number can I multiply this 1 so that I would get 2? And what I did was, I multiplied 1 times what gives me 2? 1 times 2 gives me 2, because I am doubling up my numerator. Now here's the thing we really need to remember. When we are finding equivalent fractions, or usually when we're working with fractions, whatever we do to the numerator, we have to do to the denominator. So if I multiplied my numerator, which is 1, if I multiplied it to 2, guess what? I need to multiply this 2, my denominator, with 2 as well. So I am going to multiply this to 2, because 1 times 2 gives me 2, and 2 times 2 gives me 4. Now let's find out another equivalent fraction. So how can I go from 1/2 to 4/8? So I know that I need to double up my 2, because I'm finding equivalent fraction. I need to double up my numerator and my denominator. Okay? However, we need to learn how are we doubling it up? Okay, we're not just doubling up only because we need to double up. We also need to learn to remember this step where whatever we do to the denominator, we do to the numerator. So I'm going to ask myself, which number, so I know that my double is, what's the double of 2? I know that it's 4. And what's the double of 4? I know that if I double up my 4, I'm going to get 8. But I'm going to ask myself, how did I get 4 and 8? Which number did I use to multiply my 2 and my 4 with? So I'm going to say my 2 times table. Let's see. 2 times 1 gives me 2. 2 times 2 gives me 4. So I multiplied my 2 to my, so I multiplied this 2 to 2 to get 4. Now, am I done? Absolutely not, because I still need to multiply my denominator. Now multiply it to 2 as well. So 2 times 2 gives me 4, and 4 times 2 gives me 8. Look, I multiplied my 4 and my 2, my denominator, my bottom number, and my top number to the same number. I didn't just pick any random number. I didn't say, oh, 2 times 2 gives me 4, but like what am I going to do to my denominator? I need to do the same thing to my denominator and to my numerator, my bottom and my top. Does that make sense? So how I got to, now I still ask myself, how did I get from 1 over 2 to 4 over 8? I can write, so 1 over 2, and I'm going to ask myself, how did I get from 1 over 2 to 4 over 8? Which number do I need to multiply my 1 and 2 with to get 4 and 8? I need to multiply my, in 1 times table, only and only 1 times 4 gives me 4. Whatever I do to the top number, I do to the bottom number. 2 times 4 gives me 8. So this is your equivalent fractions. Okay, so whatever you do to the bottom, you do to the top. I just multiplied. That's why it's important to have your multiplication down. Okay, your times tables. So I just multiplied my top and bottom number to the same number. So we can go directly from 1/2, so 1/2 to 4/8. We can multiply both the top and the bottom by 4. Okay, let's do another example where you get to see equivalent fractions. Okay. And grades 3, you can always pause the video. You can always pause the video to see this. Okay, I'm gonna flip the chart, but you can, if you want to pause the video, you can pause. You can quickly have a look at this, and then you can continue the video. Okay. Now we can see, we can also use, so I gave you bars. Let's look at squares. Let's look at the same thing. How can we see our shaded parts and our equivalent fraction using squares? So first we used bar graphs. Let's use squares and see, do we get the same results? Okay, so I'm gonna draw 2 squares. And we are going to find out equivalent fractions. Okay. And I'm going to draw, I'm going to divide this into 3. I'm going to divide this into 3 as well, but not just vertical lines. I'm also going to divide it into horizontal lines. So 1 and 2. Now, let's shade some parts. Okay, so I'm going to, okay, before we do that, let's write down how many parts do I have? I have 3 parts. Okay, now how many parts do I have here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. So I know my denominator here would be 9. Now I'm going to shade some parts, and you're going to tell me, or you're going to say it if you're watching it at home. So you're going to tell me, or you're going to say it to a parent, or just going to say it in your head what the numerator might be. Okay, I'm done. What is my numerator? I'm going to ask myself, what fraction is shaded? Two parts out of 3, right? So my numerator would be 2 over 3, right? We can see, so now we can see that 2 parts are shaded. Now I'm gonna shade this part, some parts over here. You're gonna again say what would be my numerator here, okay? You can say it out loud, or you can say it to mom and dad, or you can just say it in your head, okay? So I'm going to, here we go. I'm gonna shade some parts. Okay, now how many parts are shaded? That's right, I have shaded 6 parts. Do you see how this space and this space, they're equal? As in, like, I just divided up this one into doubles. I doubled this up, okay? So for example, if this was 1, 2, 3, I made this one into 9. Now, if you're going to ask yourself, well, how can this be? How can we go from 2/3 to 6 over 9? Okay, so what number could we use to multiply both these numbers so that we would get 6 and 9? We can see that 2/3 is equivalent to 6/9. Both the shaded parts and the total parts were tripled. So both the shaded parts and the total parts were tripled. We didn't double them up, we tripled them. So look at this, 3 parts. Now I have 9 parts. 2 parts shaded, but now I have 6 parts shaded. So if I had doubled it up, it would be 4. Right? If I doubled it, then double of 2 is 4, and double of 3 is 6. But this time I went further and I tripled it up, which means I multiplied my 2 to 3. So 2 times 3 gives me 6. And 3 times 3 gives me 9. So do you see how both the shaded parts, do you see it? Both the shaded parts, so I shade this part, both the numerator, so my top numbers, and my denominators, 3 and 9, they were multiplied by 3. Okay, do you see it? Now let us look at page 72. And I'm looking at question 2A. Okay, so if you look at page 72, I'm looking at question 2A, task 2A. Do you see the whole has been divided so that it has now 2, 3, or 6 equal parts? So the whole has been divided. Our whole, I'm looking at grades 3, I'm looking at page 72. I'm looking at this top task 2A. Our whole has been here. We have one whole. In your math spiral books, you're going to write down what do you have for your numerator. What's the missing numerator? Okay, they've divided into how many parts? They have 2 parts, right? So they've divided, the whole has been divided so that it has now 2, 3, and 6 equal parts. Do you see it? Now let's look at this one, B. Each part is doubled, okay? So look, here we have 1 shaded part, then 2 shaded parts, then 3 shaded parts, and then 4 shaded parts. Both the top and the bottom of the fractions must be doubled to get the equivalent fraction, the shaded parts. So you need to double up. They just doubled it up. They doubled up our numerators and they doubled up our denominators, okay? To find, so here I'm reading it in your textbook, to find an equivalent fraction, multiply the numerator and the denominator by the same number, okay? So that is what you need to do. And then you are going to move to exercise 32. So move to exercise 32. And you're going to do page 95 and page 96. Okay, grades 3, you're going to do page 95 and page 96. And that is your lesson for today. And I will see you next time in a different lesson. All the very best, and I miss you all. Bye.